Hey guys, Matt, Kevin, Liam, how you doing? Guess who I brought with me today?
Hi, boys.
It's good to see you. How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well. You know, we've been talking for a while about kind of the next For the Boys episode, and I think we both agreed that we wanted to talk about your mom and her family. And she's got a very interesting story. And so really, what is it that you would like to convey to the boys about your mom and her childhood?
Basically, I just wanted them to know that their grandmother, Murphy, had a very different childhood.
Yeah.
She was an only child. Both her parents died when she was relatively young.
Yeah.
Her mother dying when she was six. Going on 7.
Right.
And we think, what do we think she died of? What the birth certificate said, or the death certificate?
The death certificate says that she had kidney issues, kidney stones, some inflammation in the kidneys, obstruction, jaundice. She even had a surgery about 5 days before she died. So there was something going on with her kidneys, whether that was from tuberculosis, which is what we heard.
What I always understood was that they both died from tuberculosis,
right?
Because that was a major disease back in the early 30s,
right? In 30s and the 40s
and 40s.
Yeah.
So she was 6 when her mother died, and then her father died when she was 12. Going on 13.
Yeah.
So that is very difficult to lose both your parents under the age of, just being a teenager, or
right.
6 to in 6 years.
And I think you think about the historical context, guys. Your grandmother Murphy, Bonnie Murphy, was born in November 11th of 1929, and you know that the big stock market crash happened on October 29th of 1929. So this is like less than 2 weeks later, everything is kind of going downhill, and Newcastle's kind of a industrial city anyway. So
they were a very poor family.
Yeah, so things weren't looking great anyway when Bonnie was born. And then to have her mom die when she was just 6, I think, what happened immediately after the mom dying, I don't know if you want to tell that kind of where she went from there.
She kind of got moved around from family member to family member, and I think it was mostly family members on his side of the family. So she didn't get to see much of her mother's side, which my grandmother, her sister, younger sister, her biological grandmother or biological mother, sister, really wanted to do more and be a part of her life more, but the father just, after a death, it's just kind of hard for a different family, because even Mildred, they were young. Right. Mildred was 18 when she had my mom.
So Mildred is Grandma's biological mother. She went by Millie, and she married William McAvoy English.
Right.
And we actually have the original marriage certificate. So they got married in April 13th of 1929 in Newcastle. So Mildred is the biological mother of your grandmother, so your biological great-grandmother. But since she died so young, what you're saying is that Mildred's younger sister, Margaret, really took an interest in her and raised her when she could. When Margaret was old enough.
Right. Yeah. And after her father obviously died, and she was just getting kind of thrown around, and my grandmother, Margaret, her aunt, just kind of stepped in to be her mother. Right. Because, like I said, that she was, how old was William McAvoy when she was born? Do we know how old? Much older than Millie
he was born in 1907, and Millie was born in 1911. So he was 4 years.
Okay.
3.5 years.
So she was 18 and he was in his early 20s, So he's still in his 20s when, you know, his wife died.
Right. So what do you have here in front of you?
We have some pictures of your grandmother with her dad, and some pictures of her mother. We don't have a picture of her mother and her father together. We do have one, but we couldn't find it.
Right.
But we still have pictures of her biological mother. We have a picture here that I really kind of like that shows Margaret and Millie, her biological mother, and basically
her aunt.
Her aunt,
Yeah.
surrogate, who would
Surrogate
be her,
mother.
become her surrogate mother after she dies and her
Right.
father dies.
Right.
With my mom
Yeah.
as a baby. in the
As a
picture.
baby. Yeah.
So, I mean, you can zoom in on these pictures later. It's just some pictures of your grandmother when she was younger.
Right. And these pictures are pretty much, what, 1930, probably?
Yes.
I mean, she's a baby. So,
And I don't know if I said it already, but Millie and Margaret are very close sisters.
yeah, they were like the last two of a very large family.
Right. So, and there's some pictures of those two together as young kids. So.
Yeah.
And there's a letter here from her dad that he had sent from the asylum, not an insane
Sanatorium.
Sanatorium,
I think
excuse
in
me.
Cresson. So Cresson, Pennsylvania is like at least an hour straight east of Pittsburgh. So that's kind of far away. I mean, that's a
Right.
couple hours away from Newcastle. And so when William McAvoy was diagnosed, or when he got sick, he is sent to the sanatorium in Cresson because they didn't want people with TB out in the population. It was very contagious. You kind of think about COVID and what we've just gone through. I mean, I don't think TB was necessarily in the same scale,
Right.
but it was very contagious, and it affects your lungs, and so you can't.
They call it black lung as well.
They can't breathe.
And I think that was from all the coal that was being burnt at the time, and that's just how people got their
Right.
energy, which was coal, and
Right.
it caused what they call black lung and
right.
tuberculosis. So that was a prevalent illness that was going around at that point.
And I'm going to do a little bit more research on TB and kind of the statistics, especially during that time in the 30s and 40s. But
it's just to kind of show what was going on
Right.
also historically as they were caught up in the TB crisis.
Right, exactly.
Health
Exactly.
issue.
So what we have here is, you mentioned this letter. It's really a fragile letter. It's 3 pages. It was addressed to Miss Bonnie Lou English on Mulberry Street in Newcastle, care of the Contis. So she is
Staying with my mom, my grandmother at that point.
Yeah, staying with her aunt at that point in time. But this is the date on it is May 22nd, and it's coming from the State Sanatorium in Cresson. So if you look back and see when William actually died, he died on June 27th. And I know from his death certificate that he was actually in the sanatorium before this date. I think right around May 1st is when he went in here. So this is maybe
So
2 or 3 weeks. 2 or 3 weeks after he goes into the sanatorium, and we've transcribed the letter. So do you want to read the letter?
Yes, but it's just one of those things. It's handwritten with your great grandfather's handwriting. So that's just one of those
cool things
to have to see his writing.
Yeah.
Which she was not very familiar with, I'm sure, because she was so young, and I'm sure he didn't write to her often.
So, but in 1942, again, she's 12 at that point in time. But here's the letter.
Yeah, the letter says, it was dated May 21st, 1942, and it says, "Dear Bonnie, how are you? I am feeling pretty good. I am kind of weak from laying in bed all the time. In fact, I'm weak all of the time. They serve good meals here, all you can eat. Everybody makes their own bed. I don't have to. My temperature is 101 to 103. Which right there kind of tells you that he's conveying that he's a very sick person,
Right.
you know, but not.
I don't-
Trying to be upbeat, but just
Right.
talking to her. and
Not
just-
scaring.
No.
Not trying to be scary or anything, but he's giving
when
her
you-
information.
But when you realize that he dies a few weeks later,
Right.
they give you all the milk you can drink. The doctor did not say much, but I think it has started on right side, my right side. My chest on both sides are sore. I gained 3 pounds, and that's another one of those little things. It's like weight is a big issue
deal.
here. You want to
Yeah.
try and gain weight
Right.
to try and get your health back,
Right.
because you keep losing weight. You know, it's
Right.
just a matter of your body losing weight and shutting down. It has been too cold to write. They put some heat on, so I thought I had better write.
Well, stop right here for a second. I will drop in here right now a picture of the sanatorium that is now considered haunted, and they have
Right.
some of those those shows that
Like
go
ghost
through,
hunters.
like ghost hunters go in there. So it's
Giving tours.
if you think about it, they're not putting the heat on, but it is May, so they probably have. I don't know if they've got the windows open for fresh air, but he seems pretty cold.
Yes, I'm not sure why, but yeah, for May you would think it wouldn't be that cold going into summer,
Right.
unless it's a
Unless
cold
you're sick,
snap. Yeah,
or unless you're very sick.
Let's see, too cold. They put some heat on. Okay, it is 4 o'clock. You can't see a thing out. It is so foggy and cold. It's like a gambling room up here. They smoke in the toilet and play cards for money. I just stay in bed. I'm in bed now with a temperature stick in my mouth. It's 102. I wish I was back. It's lonesome, and I couldn't read that translation, and I don't talk much. How are you getting along in school? They have a regular store up here. You can buy something, even cigs. What's that? I eat a lot of candy. I just got through eating supper. Boy, am I full. Probably gained 2 pounds again with the, always worried about trying to gain weight. Well, I don't know what else to write. If there is anything you want to know, just write and ask. I am going to sleep, so I will close with love from Daddy. So.
And you and I were talking earlier, but I think it's so interesting that he says here,
Right.
if there's anything that you want to know, just ask. Just write and ask.
Right.
And again, I mean, if you're dying.
Yes. Is he asking anything you want to know about my illness or what it's like being in here or anything about me as your father?
Right.
Because I don't think she knew very much about him.
And he wasn't in her life the last 6 years, really. I mean,
she was getting moved around. I mean,
Right.
he would visit her
and then she also said that she remembers going to the sanatorium once
right.
and being able to see him through the windows because she wasn't allowed
couldn't go
inside.
in. Yeah. It's kind of like with Mom at the nursing home. We couldn't go in
Exactly.
during COVID.
During COVID. Yeah, so there's lots of similarities there. But, again, so she's up until 6, she has her mom. Her mom dies between 6 and 12. She's kind of bounced around. It looks like she was with the Contis for a little bit here, but we know that didn't stay.
Right.
That didn't last for very long until she was older,
Right.
like more in high school. But that relationship between your mom and her aunt then, her Aunt Margaret, who...
I grew up calling Grandma.
Yeah, who...
We consider
Yeah,
her.
and you guys know Margaret, or at least you probably remember pictures of her, was central in your life.
Yep.
And certainly central in Bonnie's life. And so much so that we have this card that Bonnie wrote. Or you want to talk about the pictures? Or
I think we did. I mean, you can just, when you go through and show a close-up of them, you can say who's who. And
right.
Because I kind of said a couple things.
There's some good ones in there.
Yeah. Just of when she was younger. I mean, you've seen lots of pictures of. And there's another picture, though, of here of grandmother Conti, which was her biological aunt,
Yes.
but became her surrogate mother. When they would probably remember her looking like this.
I think so too.
Well, Liam wouldn't, because he was just a baby.
Right.
When she died at the age of 92.
Right. Yep.
92, 91, 92.
Somewhere in there. Yes.
Okay. But this is a letter that my mother, your grandmother, wrote to Margaret, my grandmother, who I call grandmother, for Mother's Day. And it says Mother's Day.
What year?
May 10th, 1987. It says, Dear Margaret, just wanted to wish you a happy Mother's Day and to tell you thanks for taking my mother's place and doing such a beautiful job. We don't always say what's in our hearts, so taking this day to let you know how lucky I am to have you. It takes someone with a big heart to take on the responsibility of raising another's child. How lucky I am. Love, thanks, love you, Bonnie. So I think that's just a nice tribute to grandmother as well.
Yeah, to Margaret, absolutely.
So we just really wanted to let you know,
right,
her family dynamics growing up was a difficult one, and
right.
She turned out pretty good.
Yeah, I think she turned out great, and I think, but I think that was also conveyed in, her mothering to the four of you, and how much she loved her grandchildren as well. The family was everything to her.
Oh, yeah.
And even when I would talk to her about genealogy stuff, sometimes she would say, "Why are you interested in this?"
Yeah.
And when I would say, "Because you're my family now, and you're the family to my grandchildren," she got that.
Right.
But it was difficult to get the stories out of her because her childhood was not great.
Right.
And
there are some pictures with her and her grandparents.
Right.
On both sides.
Right.
Of her mother's mother and her father's mother.
Right.
We could show a couple pictures
Right.
of that. So it was just a very difficult childhood and being around those
Right.
people when your mother's not there.
Yeah. So we just wanted to let you know how Bonnie was raised. We know that she had a very happy life after she got married to your dad, and we'll talk about him at some point.
And you're just lucky we didn't give you McAvoy for one of your first names or middle names.
Yeah, William McAvoy. That would have been fun.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Well, we love you guys.
Bye.
Talk to you later. The main artifact for this episode of For the Boys was the letter that Dad just read to you. Now, that letter, again, was written by Grandma Murphy's father. He was in the sanatorium at Cresson, Pennsylvania, which is east of Pittsburgh. I can show you that here on the map real quick. Here's Pittsburgh, here's Cresson. Newcastle's up here, just across the border from Youngstown. So that was kind of far away, but it was probably the closest one in Pennsylvania for him to go. Now, something that I do want to show you is that Cresson Sanatorium in prison right now, and I don't know the entire backstory about this place, but it is now a center of paranormal activities. There are tours and events there, but this is what it looks like. There is also some interesting history about it. There's a still shot of it. Just a little bit of history. Tuberculosis was one of the leading causes of death in the United States. Worldwide, as the beginning of the 19th century, which is the 1800s, it had killed 1 in every 7 people who ever lived. That is an amazing statistic. TB typically attacks the lungs, although it can affect other organs and parts of the body. I think we'll learn about that when we talk about Bonnie's mother, Millie. Tuberculosis of the lungs causes painful, bloody coughs and fatigue. In the late 1880s, a German doctor discovered the cause of tuberculosis and that it was contagious. Eventually, there was a movement to confine and treat people with TB in sanatoriums. In the early 20th century, Pennsylvania established 3 state-run sanatoriums, at Cresson in Cambria County, which is where Bill English went, Hamburg in Berks County, and Mount Alto in Franklin County. So I did a little bit more research on TB just to kind of figure out the numbers. Real quick, Googled it. And when I asked how many people died of tuberculosis in the 1940s, it came back with, in 1941, the deaths from tuberculosis in the United States amounted to 59,173 just in that year. And 105,714 fresh cases were reported. Now, I'm now just really trying to compare this to the coronavirus. I'm not up to date on the statistics on coronavirus. Corona, I think, is much larger than this. In fact, I know it's much larger, but this was just in 1 year. This was, a terrible thing and very contagious, and people were dying very quickly. And so it was very scary, and certainly not something that anybody wanted to be around. Of course, it's easy for us to find Grandma Murphy in the family tree. Liam, you are the home person today. Of course, we're talking about Dad's family, so we go up in the family tree, and then this is Bonnie Lou English. Just looking a little bit at her profile, we know that she was born November 11th, 1929 in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. And she died January 25th, 2021 in Dayton, Ohio. Now, she was in Ohio because for the last couple of years of her life, she lived in a nursing home facility, or it was an independent living, but had nursing facilities in there. And she technically did die from COVID, but the parallels are not to be taken lightly between TB and COVID. So the past year or so of her life, she really wasn't allowed to leave the facility where she was living. And just like when she was little and she went to visit her dad at Cresson Sanatorium when he was in there dying of TB, she couldn't leave. And so Diane and Ron and Caitlin and Maggie and any other visitor couldn't go inside to see her, and she couldn't leave. So they would go to the windows. Grandma was on the first floor, and she would go to her window, and anybody who came to visit her came to the window on the outside, and so they could see each other and they could talk. But it was really sad that they couldn't really have that personal contact. A couple of things I want to show you on Bonnie's profile here is the 1930 census. Now remember, she was born in November of 1929, just a few days after the crash of the stock market in, I think that was Black Friday, whatever, I think it was the 29th of October, and when the Great Depression really started. But this is the 1930 census. This was enumerated in April of 1930. So Grandma was about 4 months old, I think, 4 or 5 months old. But here she is with her young family. We can see Grandma is in yellow here. And here are her parents, William McAvoy and Mildred Elizabeth. They are living in this household here. We don't really know who this William Lyons is, but probably he had a room for rent in his house, and so the young family decided to live there. So again, if we move across here, Grandma is 4 months old at this time. Her father's 22, her mother's 19. They got married when he was 21 and she was 18. Everybody is born in Pennsylvania. And as we look across here, Bill is an opener in a tin mill there in Newcastle. Newcastle is very industrial, and I'm not exactly sure what they made in a tin mill, but that was his job. So very early on in life, she's the first child born. Who knows how many more children they may have had, but we know that Mildred gets sick pretty soon after this, and the family dynamics change. So if we look at the 1940 census, just 10 years later, we know that Millie has died, and Bonnie is really kind of being bounced around to many different people. And so when she is enumerated in the 1940 census, she is here still in Newcastle, but she's living here again in yellow. She's 10 years old, but she's living with a family that we have absolutely no idea who they are. We don't know who this Lydia Johnston is, and the son Daniel, and the daughter-in-law Frances. We have no idea who this Rebecca Earl is, Ruth, Thomas Stanley. So, hopefully they weren't complete strangers, but Bonnie definitely is not living with any close relatives. She's certainly not living with her father, and she's not living with her grandparents or any of her aunts or uncles. So you just have to kind of wonder what she's thinking at this point, and how often she does see her close relatives. It's really kind of sad to see this, that she's enumerated as a lodger, just somebody who is paying rent. Who's paying her rent there? There's another question. And so it really is kind of sad. Just, the first 10, 12 years of her life were so many unknowns. And, obviously she did end up in a loving situation with Margaret, who she considered her mother, and Margaret, who really took on the role as grandmother to Dad and to Tom, Diane, and Susan as well. But the early life was tough, and I think that she was tough to get through it, and she learned a lot of survival skills, and those skills made her very successful in her family life later on. And so, we all love Bonnie very much, but it's interesting to look back on her childhood and see the challenges that she did have. Lastly, I want to take a look at some of the records for Bonnie's parents, William McAvoy English and Mildred Elizabeth Cameron, also known as Millie. We'll take a look at Millie's profile first and see if we can see some of those records. Of course, she's in the 1920, 1930, 1940 censuses, but I do want to take a look at her death record. And here's the certificate for her. Now, we believe that she died of tuberculosis. That's what we've heard all along, but her death certificate doesn't come right out and say that. What it does say is that she went into the hospital, or at least under a doctor's care, on April 30th of 1936, and that doctor took care of her until the day that she died, May 6th, 1936, when she died at about 8:15 p.m. Now, the most interesting part is this right here, and it's really kind of difficult to read. But what I've been able to decipher is that this is acute, I don't know how to pronounce this, but nephritis. And there is a record, there's a list of different ways that people can die, different causes of death, and 134 and 133 all have to do with ailments of the kidneys. And if we look down here, we can also see jaundice, which is a kidney issue, and we can see kidney stones. So what we believe happened is that the tuberculosis, while it normally goes to the lungs, can also affect other parts of the body. And something that I read doing my research on TB was that oftentimes they would do surgery to try to figure out what was going on. And in fact, Millie did have surgery on May 1st, 1936, the day before she went into the hospital. There was not an autopsy done at all, but you can see that was test-confirmed diagnosis. They did a urinalysis there. So while it doesn't come right out and say tuberculosis, more than likely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, she did have tuberculosis, and it caused her kidneys to shut down. Of course, it says kidney stones here too, but I do believe that she had TB, and then that caused bad things to happen in her kidneys. We can contrast this death certificate to the one of Bill English, Bonnie's father, and his death certificate is a little bit more straightforward. We can see that he died on June 27th, 1942. That's not long after he wrote that letter to Bonnie. And it says that the doctor certifies that they attended the deceased from May 7th, 1942 to June 27th, 1942, and that the doctor last saw him alive on June 27th. So that's the time that he was in Cresson, and very directly it says he died of tuberculosis pulmonary. So that's in his lungs. This is just pretty straightforward here. He was a shearman in the tin mill. It has information on his parents as well, but he was just 34 years old when he died. And so how sad for Bonnie that both of her parents died by the time she was 12. And she really did not have a very strong relationship with her dad, but I think that letter that our dad, your dad, Gary, just read really showed that he did love her, and perhaps he just couldn't take care of her on his own during the years after Millie died. So that is the story of Bonnie English's childhood, and it's sad to see, but it is a part of our history that hopefully will never happen again. COVID will never happen again. All of these things, hopefully we won't see it again in our lifetime at least. As this episode of For the Boys comes to an end, let's enjoy a few more pictures of Bonnie English Murphy.